Greetings, my name is Gabrielle Tayac. Everybody calls me Gabi. I'm a Beaver Clan member of the Piscataway Indian Nation, and I would like to, on behalf of the peoples that are sitting amongst us, who are sitting amongst you in the room, who are also indigenous to these lands, I would ask you if you could stand as well. If you come up with me. Deanna. So this is a place that sits in the gaze between our deepest ancestors and the waves of people who came voluntarily and by coercion over hundreds of years. I would like today to welcome you standing with my relatives. If you could just introduce yourselves.
Kristen.
I'm Deanna Beecham. Angela Barnes. Cryz Proctor.
To stand together and with you as we begin this conversation to start off properly. There is a lot in this land, and we'll be speaking about that. But for all of you to take a moment and put your hands on your hearts. And tune in. And that's our connection. It's also connection to the drum. There are many forms of a drum. This one was one that was gifted to me. Today is a day that across the hemisphere, we are remembering our women. Our sister Cryz here is wearing red today in honor of, there are thousands and thousands of murdered and missing Indigenous women that have not been found, who have been forgotten. We know that there is a hard history of this also on the land that's here. And we also know that there are many that have survived. So our sisters across this, what we call Turtle Island, this place, have asked for our people to wear red today. I have a red shoes. Is you wearing red as well, but for that red to represent the people. So the fact is that we are connected to deep histories, deep spiritual experiences, and we're also connected to what is happening right now. So I would like to bring that together and offer a song that is the Warrior Women's Song that was presented to us to carry forward. So for us to start out in that sense of remembrance and hope and work together for however it is that we're speaking. us who are here together to start in this spirit of remembrance and recognition and connection through our heartbeats, to the drum beats, to the pulse of the earth, to the pulse of the tides that are coming up the river, so that we can come together with one mind, one heart, one spirit, one voice, in all of its different forms. So with that, I'd like to say all my relations, and let's start the conversation. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Gabby, for that welcome to Piscataway Park and to reminding us that we are all connected. And thank you for being part of this conversation today. I'm Laura Ford. I'm the president of the Accokeek Foundation. And this is the last workshop in our 2019 series on land and river. Today's conversation is about interconnectedness, heritage, traditions, and history, because it really is the history that shaped our region and our country and the ways that history continues to influence our interactions with one another in the land that we want to talk about today. We're joined by a wonderful group of panelists today and a moderator who will get the discussion started, and then we'll have time for deeper discussion. So I just want to invite you all into the conversation. I'd also like to take a minute to thank the staff for pulling this together. This whole series has been a new adventure for us, and I really am grateful to the staff team for pulling it off, and I'm happy to be part of this team. Most of you know I'm relatively new to the position as president here, but I'm not new to the park or to the foundation. I've been here for about 15 years, working alongside of many of you in this room who have helped to move us toward today's conversation. This landscape tells the story of generations of change as the land has shaped people and people have shaped the land over time. The land was preserved to protect the view from Mount Vernon, but in the process of doing that, many other things were protected, and the significance of this land goes far beyond the value of viewshed preservation. It preserved the heart of the traditional homeland of the Piscataway people. The landscape carries stories of first contact and colonization, and stories that take place against the backdrop of slavery, emancipation, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights Movement, and the American Indian Movement. And we know that the community, those of you who are here in this room, and people who are not in this room, but you and your families, your neighbors, your friends, have stories to tell about these experiences. Stories that we collectively need to hear and learn from. The foundation is committed to lifting up voices that haven't often been heard without, as our board chair often says, speaking for you or over you. So when we go into the question and answer portion of the discussion, you'll be able to ask questions directly to the panel if you're comfortable doing that. We have microphones to make that easier. And if you are not comfortable asking your question directly, there are index cards on your chairs, and you're welcome to write down your questions or comments and pass them to me, and I'll make sure they get to the moderator. We also have a blue paper, that's a survey form, and we'd love it if you'd fill that out. We're funded today by the Maryland Humanities, and they're looking for some feedback on the work that is happening here in the conversation in this room. And then there's also a yellow paper, which Rob Forloni will talk a little bit more about later, but it's designed to gather some information for this interpretive planning process that we're involved in. So there are a few ways that you can participate. We recognize that the conversations that we want to have today in this room are complicated and complex and difficult. We've included some recommendations about how you can participate in your program on the inside front cover. We use this guidance with the students that come here for school tours, and it's essentially designed to create accountable, respectful dialogue. And we're looking for something that's compassionate and honest enough to carry us to places of different understanding of one another. And it's really that understanding and this opportunity to build trust with one another and to connect deeply and meaningfully that we're looking for our interpretive planning process to do. It's what we believe is going to get us to a place where we're offering a more authentic story about this landscape, and one that welcomes all visitors and helps us to connect to one another and to this land. So thank you very much for being part of this conversation today, and for investing in sharing and listening and learning from one another. And now I'd like to introduce the Accokeek Foundation's board chair, Virginia Busby. Virginia is an archaeologist who has expertise in historic preservation, land conservation, and cultural resource management. And we're very fortunate to have her leading the board.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Gabi, for your words and for your song and for standing here with us. I'd like to reiterate Laura's thanks to our wonderful staff for making these events possible, and to our videographers for enabling us to be able to preserve and share these further. Thank you, everyone. So this is our third and final gathering of this series, as Laura said, of the Land and River Conversations, and the focus is interconnectedness. I'd like to especially convey our gratitude to all the Piscataway people and Indigenous people who have joined us here today, and recognize with gratitude the generations of Piscataway who came before and who are still here in the land and the waters. I'd like to also recognize one of our Indigenous advisors who traveled up from near Richmond. Deanna Beecham is here with us. She's one of the advisors helping us with our interpretive project. Thank you, Deanna, and your wonderful spouse for making the trip. I'd also like to thank Christine Smith, our National Park Service Superintendent, who is joining us here because she too is dedicated to changing our interpretation and reaching out to our communities. Thank you, Christine. So we have wonderful panelists, and we're just so happy that you're able to help us work through this. Thank you, Crystal Proctor and Dr. Gabrielle Tayac and Chris Newman and Tara Morrison and our fabulous moderator, Dr. Julie King. So I'd like to reiterate, as my position as board chair and infiltrator for good, that the board is dedicated to joining with you to enter into transformational dialogue, to shape how we interpret our stories, how we interpret the landscape, how we work with people, how we work with the land. We're fully committed to this dialogue, and we're seeking to be catalysts and collaborators for honoring the people and the land. We're committed to listening and to being uncomfortable in the discussions and this exploration that we're joining with you in. We're committed to doing that hard work of transforming and to living reciprocally. It's hard work, it'll be complex, but we're in for it. We've chosen to make this evident in our value statement that I believe is in our program, and we're manifesting it by being present with you here today. So I'd like to recognize Gene Roberts and his wife Lynn, who is a board member, and Chris Newman, who among his many other things is also a board member. And also we have former board members, Vinnie Rotondaro. I saw you also come in. Thank you for joining us. So we're dedicated, even though people are moving on in different ways of being involved with the foundation, we really are dedicated to this. So I think, as Laura said, as you look around the room today, who are people who are not here with us that you think should be part of our conversations? Please let us know. Please reach out to them. While this is our final conversation in this formal manner, we're looking for a long-term, sustained, never-ending conversation. There will be new generations. There are other topics. We want to be able to reach those people and have a continued dialogue. So please help us in reaching out to people and bringing them, if you can, to let them know that they can reach out to us in many ways, through our online portal, through calling us, to bringing their dog to walk and talking with us casually. We're looking for that connection. And thank you for being here with us. And hopefully you'll feel that you can make some comments today or ask some questions, whether it's through cards or whether you feel comfortable speaking with the panelists and us today. But most of all, thank you for being here and joining with us. Just that is really important, and we recognize that. And I'll hand it back to Laura for the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia. I'm just going to make very brief introductions because I want us to have as much time as possible to hear from the panelists. Our moderator, and you all can come on up after we have a special performance, but after that you can come on up. So this is the last time I'm going to talk until the end. Julie King is our moderator today. You want to just wave so people can see who you are since you're not up front. Julie has 30 years experience studying, writing, and teaching about historical archaeology and Chesapeake history and culture. And we also have Cryz Newman. Cryz is the co-founder of Silvanaco Farms and a member of the Choctaw Band of Piscataway Indians. Cryz places a heavy emphasis on indigenous ethics, values, and knowledge that serve as the often unacknowledged foundation of the modern permaculture movement. Cryz Proctor was born a fifth-generation clan mother and two-spirit of the Cedarville Band, Wild Turkey Clan of the Piscataway Conoy Nation. Art is Crystal's way of release and expression. Dr. Gabrielle Tayac is a member of the Piscataway Indian Nation. She's an activist scholar committed to empowering indigenous perspectives, and she's proud to serve in the elevation of Native women and girls as the director of legacy collections at the Spirit Aligned Leadership Program. And Tara Morrison began at the National Park Service as an archaeology intern in Washington, D.C., and rose to be the first superintendent of African Burial Ground National Monument in New York City. Since December 2016, she served as the superintendent of National Capital Parks East, which is the unit that is managing our park. So Christina is our superintendent of Piscataway Park. Tara is the superintendent of National Capital Parks East. Tara is responsible for managing and directing national parks that honor heroes of American history, including Frederick Douglass, Mary McLeod Bethune, and Carter G. Woodson, as well as Anacostia Park. And then Shemika Berry is our interpretation coordinator at the Accokeek Foundation. She's been an independent historical interpreter for over 15 years, and she's been with the foundation for about 5 years. She interprets the story of Kate Sharper, an enslaved woman who's documented as being in this region during the colonial era. Shemika's been active in the theater community throughout the region and has a one-woman show. This is Stories, Living History. We also have as our facilitator for the last part of this dialogue, which will happen between 4 and 5, Rob Forloni. Rob collaborates with cultural institutions to develop innovative programs, train interpreters, and facilitate strategic planning, and he's working with us as our consultant on interpretive planning. And so with that, I'll invite Shemika Berry to come share Kate Sharper with us.
Welcome to the Bolton Farm. I am Kate Sharper. My grandparents were born in our motherland. They lived a happy life until the day that they were separated and brought to this land. I remember hearing stories of how they were bound, shackled to others that they did not even know. They were bound head to foot, and many did not make it. My grandmother and grandfather were separated, and the only reason that I am here is grandmother was carrying my mother. They were brought to this land, and mother was born. They named her Esther. And after many, many years, I was born. Upon the marriage of Mistress Bolton to Master Bolton, I was brought to this land. It was a difficult time. Oh, how I missed my mother. The Boltons are tobacco farmers, and we must go out and toil the land, fighting the flea beetle, the teeny tiny creatures that you can barely see. Before you know it, they can destroy all the seedlings of the tobacco. They are a thorn in my side. Have you ever seen a hornworm? 'Tis the most unpleasant creatures you could ever hope to see. They can grow to be this long and be as fat as your thumb and are the same color green as the tobacco leaves themselves, save the black and yellow stripes that go down their back and a little horn that just whittles at you. The tobacco leaves themselves are quite sticky if you've never touched them, and anything that you touch afterwards gets stuck to your hand. We must pull off the hornworms one by one, morning, noon, and night. Oh, how they are terrible to pull off, and if you do not get them just so, they will spit out everything they have eaten all over your hands. 'Tis enough to make your stomach turn. The Boltons are modest farmers. I am the only one that looks like me here on this land. They are not as well off as Colonel Washington across the river. I hear tell he has over 300. But no, 'tis the year 1770 and I am the only one here. Oh, I was not always the only one here. You see, my last name is Sharper. I am not a part of the Bolton family, nor are they a part of mine. But I am married. Oh, my husband Tom Sharper. I know not if you've heard of him, perhaps not, but Tom is a free man. He may come and go as he pleases, and how he came to get his freedom, I am not certain. 'Tis not a story that he shares often, but it brings me great pride to say that my husband Tom is free. And because he is free and not owned by the Boltons, when he works, they pay him a small wage. I know not what it is like to be paid for my work. They do not pay Tom anymore. So a while back, their youngest son took terrible ill, and they spent all the money that they had to purchase medicine for him. Oh, they were so thankful that he was saved and spared, but Thomas had to find work elsewhere. And he has found a farmer who has more of an open mind, who allows him to rent land and to grow his own tobacco. Late at night, while the Boltons are sleeping, after I have finished all of my other work, of course, I steal away and I help Tom tend to his tobacco. 'Tis a different feeling to pull off the hornworms of the tobacco plants of your husband than the tobacco plants of your owner. Tom and I have been married a great number of years. Together we have a son named Jack. He is my pride and joy. I am able to read and we learn by stitching our letters upon samples. And I have them upon my pocket, and it brings me such great joy to teach Jack how to read. You see, though Tom is free because I am a slave, my child is a slave. It would be like if you owned a horse. Any filly or colt that the mare has would belong to you. Doesn't matter where the stallion came from. And so Jack is a slave because I am a slave. But he is always so helpful. We must hang the tobacco from the rafters of the tobacco barn so that they may dry and cure properly. And well, I'm getting up there in age, and if I were to fall and break a hip, I'd not be no good to nobody. But Jack is always the first one to say, "Don't worry, Mama, I'm gonna climb up there and hang him." As he bounds from rafter to rafter, it gives my heart enough to stand still. But he always comes back down safely. At least he did while he was here. flea beetle that I told you about? Some years back, it was like a plague straight from the Bible, and they just descended upon the crops like nothing we had ever seen, and before we even knew it, half the tobacco was gone. Oh, Master was so worried that they would lose the land that he started talking to Mistress about what would they sell. They sold a cow. They sold a horse. It wasn't enough. They took my child from me, and they took him down to the river to sell him off. I will never forget the day when they ripped my heart out of my chest and sent my child up the river. Bring me back my child. He was in his 12th year, and there was nothing I could do as I watched his figure get smaller and smaller as the river took my child away. Every time I go down to collect water for laundry, I see his tear-streaked face. That was 4 years ago. My husband is gone. My son been sold away. I just wanted to die. I thought I would die, and I didn't care if I died. I sleep in the loft of the kitchen, and I took to the loft for 3 weeks. I refused to get out of bed. What were they going to do to me more than what they had already done? Master was concerned I was going to die, but only because he was worried about who was going to tend to his tobacco. Mistress came up with the idea of perhaps give her something to live for. Master said, well, maybe if we give her a small plot of land, a little piece of the garden for her to grow her own fruits and vegetables, it'll give her the gumption to get on up out the bed. Can you imagine? They thought me tending to fruits and vegetables would make up for losing my child. But Mother always said I was a clever girl. So I went into the garden. There was some okra, some tomatoes, some sweet potatoes. And I tended to them, and I nurtured them. Because I had an idea. If Tom could grow his own tobacco and sell that and be able to keep the money to do what he would with it, why could I not do the same with my fruits and vegetables? And so at night when I would steal away to help him tend to his tobacco, he and I would talk and we would make plans. I would grow enough of the fruits and vegetables for myself, but grow just a little bit more that perhaps nobody would notice was missing. At night, I would steal away with the harvest and take them to Tom. And that, coupled with his tobacco, selling them, we have great hopes that we'll be able to earn enough money to save to buy Jack's freedom. You see, he's 16 now and he's nearing a man. Oh, I've heard stories that he's doing well, and learning how to tan, and even apprenticing himself out, but I want him to be able to be free. I care not about my freedom. I want what's better for my child than what I had, than what my mother had, than what was stolen away from my grandparents. They knew what it was to be free, and I have only heard stories, but I want that life for my baby. And so I will toil the ground until my fingers bleed, until my back breaks, so that I can grow what I need to and help my husband with his farm. Because there is nothing I want more in this world than for my son to be free, free like his father, and not a slave like his mother. Now invite the rest of the panelists to join me. I was just going to say that as the interpretation coordinator, it is my responsibility to create the programs that we use to tell the stories of this land. And with my heritage and with the heritage of those on the panel, our ancestors have had to endure the unspeakable. And as an interpreter, it is my responsibility to give voices to their stories. In my bio, you heard that I've been interpreting for about 15 years, and I do historical figures that are found in the encyclopedia and found in textbooks. But I find it a great honor and responsibility to tell the story of Kate Sharper, because you won't find her in an encyclopedia, you won't find her on Wikipedia, you won't find her in a textbook. But we have one piece of paper that has her name, Kate Sharper, and her son Jack, that was part of a will. And that is all that we know about her. The story that we have crafted over the years, we say is historically plausible. We don't know if it happened to her the way that we tell it, but the story that we tell happened to somebody's ancestor. And giving voices to those stories is what is important. Kate Sharper is not in anybody's textbook, but she lived in this area. She breathed this air. She worked this land. And because of that, that is her historical significance. She lived and she deserves to be remembered. And she represents the voices of our ancestors who have been lost in time and stolen.
Thank you. And thank you for a moving performance. I mean, that was, I'm Julie King, and I want to thank all of you for coming to the final panel discussion this afternoon. But I want to tell you, I've been spending the last couple of months reconstructing the slave population and free population to the best of my ability in this area, and it's horrific. But to see how you really personified it just is, it makes what is horrific in sort of this clinical, historical way, even, it really humanizes it. So thank you very much for that. And thank you also to all of our panelists for being back today for our last Sunday, where we're going to be talking about interconnectedness, heritage, traditions, and history. And so as moderator, my role has been to come up with some questions to present to our panelists, and then they respond to them. So I came up with a number of questions thinking about interconnectedness, heritage, traditions, and history. What does that even mean? And because it can kind of mean whatever we want it to mean, right, can it? So I'm going to start with the first question, and you all can choose the order that you want to respond in. But the first question is, what does interconnectedness mean to you when it comes to history? Remember, last week was reciprocity with the environment. So this week is more of a history heritage. What does interconnectedness mean to you when it comes to history?
For me, it's, you can't appreciate the present and look towards the future if you don't understand the past. I've been asked for many years, why is it that I portray the enslaved population, especially by actors of color? They ask me, why would you, we have so many more stories to tell, why do you dress as a slave and tell those stories? And I said, because if we don't understand how many of our ancestors got here, you will not understand the extraordinary accomplishments that we have made. My children are 19, 14, and 12. And prior to this current administration, the only president that they knew was President Barack Obama. That was their norm. I, at 42, never thought I would live to see the day where we would have an African-American president. So that the day he was elected was extraordinary. It was an extraordinary moment in history. But for my children, it's all they've ever known. And if I don't teach my children and other children, our ancestors were stolen from their country and brought to this land to work it, to toil, and not be paid, and not be respected, and not be seen. And now we have reached a point in history where we had a president who looked like us. And if they don't understand our past, they can't appreciate the present that they lived in, and they can't know to want to continue to strive forward to have a better future.
Hop on from there. So I have the joy and the pain of being both African American and Native American at the same time. That can be a heck of a thing. To be steeped in both cultures. When you mentioned Barack Obama, that really made me think of my mother's grandmother, who was black. She was 104 years old when she died. She was an old woman. And didn't pass that long ago. She passed 3 years ago. She and my other grandmother, who lived to the age of 99, died within a week of each other. And there's this odd bit of family lore that my father's mother wrote my mother's mother a letter, and then a week later, they were both gone. Nobody's found the letter. It's the strangest, creepiest thing in our family history. It's like, what's in the letter? Are you done? I'm done. Let's go. But I remember when Barack Obama was elected, and my mother's reaction to it was that she just cried. She cried, didn't say a word, just cried for hours. It was the oddest thing I'd ever seen, and I didn't really appreciate it until a little while later when I talked to my mother. And my mother reminded me that my grandmother had heard the voices of slaves in her own ears, and then lived long enough to see a country where somebody with a name like Obama and somebody darker than me got elected president of the United States. She attended my wedding to a woman who was white in Virginia, in This is kind of a lot of where the story of slavery began, was right across that river. For her to witness the things that she saw in the last 5 or 10 years of her life, I mean, it's hard to imagine what that's like. To see how past connects to the present and what the future may hold. So that's just kind of an anecdote that came to me. The other thing that I think is interesting, where you have an intersection and an interconnectedness between oppression and opportunity. I talked in the first section about how there's a different view of agriculture and farming, and Kate Sharper's character talks about how she's brought to this place from somewhere else to work somebody else's farm, to work somebody else's land. The land is a source of her pain, but it's also a source of her redemption. For Native people, farming in the traditional sense, where you're on a private piece of land and you're farming it for commercial reasons, a lot of that was considered a form of surrender. Kind of our version of Uncle Tom is hanging around the Fort Indian. Somebody that's kind of clinging on to the white man and his ways to make their way, and kind of selling their soul and selling their culture for staying alive a little bit longer. It's a complicated thing, but just when Kate's character is talking about farming her own plot of land, it immediately reminds me of my grandfather, Elizabeth, the 104-year-old, her husband, who apparently is just like me, workaholic, doesn't sleep, doesn't eat enough. This is a guy who was basically a wealthy man in the 30s, in Depression-era America, because he was a farmer. He was good at it. He set records for the amounts of peanuts and cotton that he was able to grow. He would not wait for white people to get done, doing their, the way racism worked back then, during farming, was everybody used to help each other on their farms, and you'd have crews of poor white people and poor black people who would pick each other's crops, and of course the white people would always do the white people stuff first, and there were never enough black people, surprisingly, even in the South. Newman wasn't having that yet. So he would actually pay white people out of spite to get them to come to his farm first, and would get his stuff in at peak times. He's an incredibly clever man. And I don't want to get too much into agricultural technicals about when you're supposed to look at the moisture content of different types of crops to know exactly when to pick them, but Newman knew when, and would just throw money at white people to come over his farm just to say to everybody else and say, I got my crop in when it's the most profitable, I'm going to go build a church. But the reason he was in that part of the country in the first place is because a few generations back, somebody stole his ancestors straight out of Africa. Like a piece of furniture. So it's just, from our perspective, to look at that blending of what makes an opportunity now, where I'm a farmer now, and my grandmother had interesting things to say about me becoming a farmer, when she and Newman had worked their asses off to get everybody off the farm. Like, I said 2 times ago, the arc of black progress is supposed to go away from the plantation, not back to the plantation, where now I am literally farming on a plantation. Like, I am at Robert E. Lee's estate, farming my ass off and making plenty of money doing it. So it's kind of this odd thing where these 2 things blend, and that's something that has to sit in our bodies all the time. Especially people who decide to return to the land, and reconciling that interconnectedness between pain and potential.
So first, I want to thank the Accokeek Foundation for the invitation and for this series, and also to Gabby for the welcome and for the interpretation. And because of those 2 pieces and starting this conversation, now, when I think of interconnectedness, the first thing that came to my mind is the key to healing. And so in this space that we're in, and feeling the energy of the space that we're in now, healing is what comes to mind. And just taking one aspect of that in the work that I do So it's both professional and personal. One of the sites that we manage in the National Park Service is the Carter G. Woodson National Historic Site. And for those who don't know, he is the founder of Black History, established Negro History Week initially, which we now know as African American History or Black History Month. And someone who has a bachelor's in African American Studies, there's always that discussion of African American history needing to have that focus, but also understanding it is American history. So it's interconnected. And in order for us to heal, there needs to be that understanding of the history, of how we got to where we are, because when we try to just focus on the present and not peel back those layers to understand why there's conflict, why there's economic disparity, why there are the challenges that we have, we don't make the progress that we need to make. So while we are proud to have Carter G. Woodson National Historic Site and African American history and African American studies, it's critical that we make sure that we're talking about it in the context of the larger history of the United States of America. And for me, that's where the thinking about interconnectedness in one way, that was the first thing that came to my mind today.
Yeah, you know, where we're, thank you for that, you know, thinking about Carter G. Woodson, there's been a series of mediated conversations about what are those teachings and what are those understandings as they apply to so many of us. And where we sit, really, in a place where you cannot understand the history or the present without looking at the different facets of not just why things happen, but how they happen. So, you know, thinking about the tobacco, just tracing that, going out into the Caribbean, and then how that the waves of people who came, the idea that because you're looking at a cash crop that has to radically change the landscape and pull Native people away from those places originally. When you talk about the history of, you know, Pocahontas or Matoka and John Rolfe, not John Smith, but John Rolfe, you know, he's a person who is the big tobacco farmer, and then that brings in people that are enslaved, and the ideas of control and work that had to be done. You know, I just learned a big mind-blowing fact some years ago. Many of you have heard of the Trail of Tears, right? And there are so many trails of tears of not just Cherokee people, but so many others. And what I never thought about, and this is something particularly from a Native history lens, a lot of times we see things as, you know, why did this happen to us, right? What happened to us? What was it that had us be removed from those places? And being removed from places actually even internally, what we consider to be internally to Maryland now, or to these areas where people just got pulled out, pushed back by land development. When you look at the territories of the Southeast and you overlay them now, you have also the idea and the process of King Cotton, you know? So the cotton growing lands were those tribal lands. And in order to get to them, you have to pull Native people off and remove them. And I had never thought about that before. I had never really considered that what happened to one group of people is because of a broader economic process, you know, that also becomes worldwide, and it has to do with industrialization and all of those things, and that's operating right here on the landscape. in this area. So it's not possible for us to comprehend and then also to develop strategies for hope, healing, and growth without relying on each other. There, for Piscataway, anybody in this area, nobody is, you're not talking about places way out in isolation. We all live together, marry each other, love and fight each other for centuries. And there's so much for us to pull from in order to get a sense of the idea of why is this land specifically preserved and protected. And I touched on that last week. It's because of Mount Vernon. If you go back a little further, because I always thought, well, what, did you ever think about why is Mount Vernon there? Why is it there? And if you go back further, you start to learn that Kinnikin's daughter, who married Brent, they ended up with land over on this side, which then moved into the Custis family, which then comes into George Washington's family, and within adjacent lands. So it's not some mystical, maybe it is. I mean, a lot of times we think about that as like, oh, creator saved this place, and yes, but how did that happen? And it's because of those power relationships that crisscross over time that we need to understand and realize how it is set up at its very foundations of interconnectedness. And in addition, the idea, a fundamental indigenous concept that we see, many, the world's religions and philosophies are focused on diverse tenets and structures. For Native and Indigenous spirituality and the way that societies have been set up and still stay with us is this idea of all my relations, or everything is connected. Everything in terms of its natural beings, the way that the societies are set up, the way the families and extended families are set up. We know so much of that has been, cut off, changed, disrupted, trying to come back to healing to get into that. So it's on the interconnectedness of history and experience is at every level. For all of us in this room.
Well, no, beat up on that, huh? Okay, I don't know. You rock my world today. I don't even know how to maintain it right now. I don't know how you sit in a room and think about things like that happening to women and children. Quite often when you think about the Native person, you're talking about a very violent man. That's what Hollywood has shown us. A violent man who, is painted and ripping a white woman away. And we're fed that story with a spoon, right? And we believe it for a very long time. And John Wayne, everyone else is just... But when we see this, it's, oh, well, okay, that's okay. Can we get over that now? And it goes about to peeling those layers back and understanding. And I think about my ancestors. What did they think when they looked at slaves? Like, what was going on? Why is this woman touching tobacco? And why does she stay there for hours a day? Where's her family? Where are other women? Because we come from a place where the men are gone hunting, and we're with our women, our family, and we're being productive. But you're kind of alone. And then you may have chains on, and you look kind of tattered and torn. And what do we do about that? How do we feel about that? And to me, watching you today, I brought all those women with me. And I just cried. I don't know if you can ever heal from that. I've been told I'm the angry Indian woman a lot. And maybe it's just my generation. I don't know, just being angry about things. And I don't know, maybe it comes out being angry, but we're devastated. Because I don't and will never have the privileges that you all do, no matter how light bright I may look. And how many generations do we all have to suffer that before everyone realizes that we have no choice. We're all here, regardless if we want it to be or not, or removed, or taken away. And how do we heal or remedy with each other? And it is every single person's responsibility, and no one will ever get over it. Ever, because it falls right in the genes of every single person from the very first mother who ever experienced a whipping. And you know, we have the passion, you know, of Christ, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, and you watch this man who, you know, we have in history. Me personally, I don't believe he existed, but that's just what it is. And we watch him getting whipped and beat, and we celebrate that in a way, and we honor that in a way. But have we ever honored a black woman? Have we watched a movie and sobbed because she was really, really beaten that way? Or a black man, or an Indian man? No, because we need to get over it. And I have to address that because I feel as though I'm this person in the room that is just, I guess, I don't know if I can deal with history in a personal way without being sad and angry for every single person who has gone through this and carrying that burden and load. A part of me being a clan mother is to teach and to share and serve, and that's it. It is not a right, it is not a crown, it is nothing to boast about, it is servitude. And if I serve this man, I serve this woman, and everyone in this room. Not just my people. And if I weep for this woman, then I have to weep for this woman, equally. And I think that's something that we should think about, interconnectedness. How we try to separate and segregate things about on levels. This is just, okay, well, you've only gone through this much, so it's not as bad. And we can kind of forget that, okay, that's good. But I can go home and feel good about it. Or, you know, I didn't do that to you. I've heard that too. I didn't do that to you. True, but you're here because of that reason. You have those privileges because of those reasons. And how do you honor and respect that in some type of way, or bring the healing to that? Not by telling someone to get over it, but maybe by offering opportunity to be like who we are today, sitting and listening and talking and expressing those things. Not just saying, it's not my problem, because it is. Thank you.
Panel, that has been some amazing insights and discussions. I really appreciate how you answered that, addressed that question, and so all these other questions have to although I think that they're relevant questions, but they're the kinds of questions we'd say we were down in the weeds over, as opposed to these larger questions. Your point about, I didn't do that to you, get over it. I mean, I hear that now, and I've internalized it because of the reading these, in a clinical way, these documents, and just like, there is no getting over it. There is no getting over it. And your point about every single person's responsibility, and you're more global, and your healing, and your performance, and you're connecting this to not just to how we make our living in terms of how we eat, how we sustain human life. Before I ask my next question, I just want to make sure that, how are we doing on time? We're doing good on time? Okay, so the question that I thought I would ask after hearing this is to not come down into the weeds. And I hear from Crystal that maybe healing is not going to be possible, that there may be scars. And Tara, you had talked about we need to think about trying to at least do some healing. And I do want to say that I don't know how many people in here can say this, but I remember where I was when Kennedy was shot. And I was little, and so when Barack Obama was elected, I mean, I felt probably just as much as your grandmother's. Maybe I almost feel 100 sometimes, but I'm not quite there yet. And St. Mary's College actually closed the school so that people could go to the inauguration or watch it. And we didn't have that reaction in 2016. So I want to go back to this idea of healing, because I think it kind of goes to the core about interpretation. And I realize that in some ways I'm asking you all, what should we do? But I think that the second half is when we turn to the audience and say, okay, you've heard, what do we do for the interpretation? So I don't want you all to feel like you have to bear the burden of what is the answer. So I wanted to, the question that, and I'll throw it out there and you can revise it in any way, is how can we use, not a site like the Carter Woodson or the Frederick Douglass House, but how can we use a site like this that was a plantation, although before that, and still is, a sacred site and a place of tremendous achievement, and how can we use that? How can we mix this, work it, to begin the healing process? Recognizing that we may not get there in our lifetime, or we may never get there. But how do you think that we use this place? And I don't mean just National Colonial Farm, but I mean the region around here.
I believe we'll get there, first of all. I do. Because we already are here. And we have refused to listen or to follow so many of those, rules that we're not supposed to be here. That we weren't supposed to make it. Who would have ever thought, in 1905, Theodore Roosevelt gave a State of the Union address, presidential address, and he said one of the goals was to figure out how to, and this is a quote, pulverize the tribal mass. That didn't happen. And so I just want to say that this, this land, it breathes and it does have all of those layers. It's like, I'm so glad you brought up that thought of healing and also of wounding. And the fundamental step that has to be taken first in order to heal from a trauma these are layers and layers and layers and layers of trauma. I mean, talk about, we talk about compounded trauma. And I see, just walking through here, just being here and in this region, it's all of the historic peoples, but we've also had, there's so many refugee peoples, so many of our indigenous peoples from the south. After I left here last week, I went down to our burial site, just up the road, and there were families, Central American families, and thinking, that they're going through so much of this right now. But they were here on the river and happy, in that moment, because you have that time to breathe. So when you go through those layers of trauma, the first thing that you have to do in order for somebody or for our society or for our culture to recuperate is there has to be a protection. You have to keep that space. You cannot heal what you cannot protect, and you cannot grow if you don't heal first. It's just too hard. So I think that these are kind of big things, but this is also, I think all of us sitting here, probably most of you sitting with us, there are all of these methods and details and historic facts and policies and issues, but at its core, why do we do this? Why? And what we do is, it's because of, who we are as interconnected people. So I do believe very strongly, and I know this because we're sitting here, like we're not supposed to be here. Like we are really not supposed to be here. I said that for years at the museums. The reasons I was a curator at Smithsonian and NMAI for 18 years. That whole collection, what we have, even in St. Mary's and all of these other places, a lot of that was collected because we are not supposed to be here. It was supposed to be a remnant of us. But here we are. And here you are. And our children are here. And my children's placentas are buried on the burial grounds. So I think that that's basically a sensibility, but we have never, any of us, we have never been able to do this alone. That's like far out, all throughout history. Never been able to do this alone. And all of our successes, every time there's been a victory, we're talking about the days that seem so far away right now in terms of the Obama inauguration and election, but none of that is done alone. So I know that those are big general things, but I just wanted to kind of bring it back to like what is the driving principle and reality that motivates us in this placement of our energy.
I'm glad you said that we're not in this alone. What came to my mind was, besides the little bit of written history that we do have, we've got to speak to our elders and get those oral histories and get those written down. Yesterday I had the opportunity, the privilege and the honor to meet Mrs. Gladys West. And for those of you who may not know who she is on Wikipedia. But she is a mathematician who was responsible for a lot of the ideas that are now what our GPS systems are. So if you used your iPhone or your Galaxy Samsung or your GPS in your vehicle to get here today, you could thank Mrs. Gladys West for that. And when I met with her, she and her daughter wanted to know, why did I want to meet her? Was it an interview? What was I trying to do with the information? And I said, I just want to meet you. I just want to sit at the feet of an elder in our community who has a historical contribution, who has stories that aren't going to be on Wikipedia and won't be in a textbook and won't be in the encyclopedia, but I wanted to meet the woman behind the text in a textbook. She is one of the hidden figures, and because of historical interpretation, she won't have to be hidden anymore. And that is what I want, and that is what I hope that this type of conversation can do, that we can communicate with each other and learn from each other and learn from our elders and write down what we know so that we can tell the stories properly and honestly, and that they're not forgotten. Because if we don't talk to our grandmothers and grandfathers and great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers, then we won't know. It's very rare as an African American, to be able to know any past generational history beyond my grandparents or my great-grandparents. And some of my family members are very deep into finding out about our genealogy, and they were able to find out some information about my paternal great-grandmother's family. And I've actually got a photo of our family tree, and her maiden name was Arsenault, and we can trace it back to France to see where the European came from. But then there is one block where it has a European descendant male who married a slave, and she was from another plantation, and that was where the African American portion came into our family, the African heritage. And so we see that offshoot of where we are, and to see my great-grandmother's name, and to have that as not only as an African American woman who traditionally we wouldn't be able to have any documentation of our past, but as a historical interpreter, to see that and to be able to see, this is my line, this is my family, this is where it goes. And if we didn't talk to our relatives and we didn't talk to our elders and nobody had written it down, we wouldn't be able to have it. And that is what I take away from it, that we need to work together, and all of us, all of our cultures that are represented in this area, in this community, we need to all talk to each other so that we can get those stories correct. No matter how ugly they may be, we have to talk to each other. Communication is key.
If I'm remembering the question correctly, which you also said we could reframe the way we wanted, but I think you talked about how can we use a site like this, and you specifically said not like Douglas or Woodson. I'm actually going to bring them back in, because I know, and I do also believe healing is in reach, but the only way we're going to get there is with every ally possible. And so it is those other sites, and using people, reaching people, connecting with people wherever they are, so that we're working together. And for me, that's probably what led me to work for the National Park Service. It wasn't a plan. I just feel like this is where I was led to do the work that I've been born to do. So I do believe that all of these places, whether it's a structure that represents a person or a land and people that are interested in connecting that land to people, we all have to be in this together in order to achieve that. The other piece is absolutely elders, but it's also the next generation. Because as we're talking about the work that we want to do, aside from the baby, I don't know the age of the youngest person in this room, but we also need to make sure that we're reaching younger people, and one, making sure they know this history and understand the importance of continuing that and ensuring that we move in the right direction. So it's engaging younger people and finding a way to connect with all allies possible wherever they are.
I go with On my farm social media, I talk about race a lot, and I always get the question of how do we move from white people? How do we move past this? How do we heal? And I usually respond, what do you think healing looks like? And for white people, it's usually forgetting and not having to deal with it. Robin DiAngelo wrote a really, really good book called Why It's So Difficult to Talk to Racism. I've talked to white people about racism, that talks about the difference in goals when it comes to healing between people of color and white people. Healing is ugly. Physical healing, there's blood, there's pus, there's pain, there's weird fluids you can't identify, it's gross, it's awful, and you never forget. About a month ago, I got opened up by one of my boards because I wasn't paying attention. Left a scar just from here all the way up to here. I mean, opened me up like Jesus on the cross, and bled like hell, hurt like hell. It's healed. You know, I don't feel it. If I go like this, I can feel it there. If I want to mess with kids, I can go, hey, look at this, and they all go, ah! But it's there, and it's never going to go away, and it's not pretty. And because it's there, I learn from it. You know, every time I go to take a shower, I remember, don't turn your back on the board. That was stupid. So I think a lot of this, you know, getting toward healing is getting people who are in positions of power to understand what that healed state is going to look like. And it's not going to look like black people stop talking about slavery or indigenous people stop talking about death and dispossession. That's not what healing is going to look like in its final state. When we talk about how can we use a place like this to get toward that healing, for me, it's always been, for Native, you know, on the Native side, I'll start here, is give us access to the land where we can make it what it was. Native landscapes were places that provided for everything. Kate Sharper's story is a story of what happens when people's relationships with the land go to hell. You're growing tobacco and nothing but tobacco. You're growing a monoculture that shouldn't be there. You're growing sacred plants in excess for profit, and then a biblical plague comes and you wonder why. And we say, what do you mean why? Karma, physics, like, you know, which one do you want? Places like this park, Accokeek, the towns and the villages and the people who lived and died here before anybody who would eventually call themselves an American were here, were places that provided for every need of the people, and these places were managed like the whole entire grounds was a church. There were things that you just did not touch. There were things that you did touch. There were things that you touched at a certain time and for a certain reason and under certain ceremony. There were reasons behind everything. We did a lot of things to the land. There's this idea that Native people just kind of let Eden take its course, and we were these simple, kind of fairy-like, childlike people who didn't. We massaged the hell out of this land to be able to provide for us the way that we did, in a way where it wasn't extractive, where it was regenerative, where we were building the ability to survive on this place. And it's really difficult within the context of the modern conservation ethic to do that now, and to demonstrate not only for, you know, my kids who are indigenous and other kids who are indigenous and people who are non-indigenous, to understand what we did to this place to make this place, you know, worthy, or make us worthy of this place, honestly, let's put it that way, and to have this land provide for us. It would be really nice if we could start a dialogue, and I don't know whether that's with the National Park Service, I don't know if it's with archaeologists, and having a real conversation about how can we get access to this place to do with it what we used to. Since I've been in Accokeek, the thing that has always floored me whenever we talk about doing different kinds of, whether they're agricultural projects or cultural projects, the amount of stuff you can't do because there's archaeological sensitivities in here, mostly having to do with my people. It pisses me off to no conceivable end that people who are non-Indian think that they care more about my ancestors on the ground than I do. It almost makes you a little homicidal. I mean, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot of chutzpah. to start that dialogue about, if we're going to use this place to do that healing, that would be a great place to start. On the other side, the African American side, it's split in half. It's like we're arranged by skin colors. It's like, I might have talked about this 2 sessions ago or so, but the Accokeek Conservation Corps had a group of high school kids, I think from Prince George's County, come in, mostly, I think they were all African American kids, and came in and they were going to do some farming. And the idea was, for them, when they first started here, it was like, look, we get paid and we get to be outside. I chose this one because I could have done one that was inside. I want to do the one that was outside because I want to be outside. But I'm just getting paid, don't really care about farming, don't care about agriculture. I just want to be outside and make money. By the end of it, and I've told you this 1,000 times, you had these kids saying, when I start my farm, like it was like, this is what we are going to do. It's not if, it's not I want to start my farm, it's when it happens, it's going to happen. Like it's, future perfect. Using a space like this to open up that kind of opportunity to young African American people, to get them away from the idea that any kind of farming, any kind of connection to the land is a social step backwards or downwards, would be absolutely enormous. Because I don't think a lot of people understand the crisis that's coming in farming and in how we feed ourselves. People kind of get it from a theoretical perspective, but when you're on the ground and you see what rain looks like and what dry periods look like and what's happening to seed stocks, you see just how real it is. And you see that problem, but you also see how much opportunity there is for people who are willing to, kind of get over that whole, farming is the plantation, farming is slavery, farming is surrender, and realizing that there's enormous entrepreneurial opportunity as well as an opportunity to take care of land that needs to and deserves to be taken care of. Our generation, the millennial generation, I'm kind of on the border, I forget what the other one is, but people that are younger than us, they want meaning in their work from day one. They don't want to start a mailroom and freaking shovel crap for like 10 years until they get an opportunity. No, they want to come right out of college or sometimes right out of high school and make a difference right now, even though they don't know anything. The only place where that's really possible is farming, because you make a difference immediately. You put a seed on the ground, it pops up a week later. You just freaking basically created life. You're one step away from the creator. You don't get any closer to meaning than that. So those would be the 2 things I'd say we could use to use this land in this space to start that process.
I haven't said anything yet. When I think about this place, I think about the river. Very first thing. More than the land, I think. And I guess I come from Cedarville. So Cedarville State Park is a big deal for me. And Brandywine is a big deal for me. But as a young child, coming here with my parents to clean the shoreline every year. And where I live now is right on the other side of Virginia, but right at the river. And I walk it every day, and I see trash, tons of trash. And I just feel, again, I'm angry. And I think about, again, responsibility. And I think as a whole, instead of so much as an individual. In my own home, what am I doing to keep this river sacred? Because it is very sacred to people, even way up into Canada. We talk about Potomac. And we essentially trash it every day. And I thank you for hosting a space for us to help clean this shoreline. But how many states does this river cover? 3, 4? A lot. Of all the life that comes out of this river, some of them that I'm wearing today. Even though agriculture was a main issue for us a lot, but we lived off of the water. We are river people. We are water people. And we were in the canoe all the time, singing and celebrating. And maybe bringing those stories back those songs back, allowing us access to the land and the water, to tell our stories, to share our stories with people who want to listen. I've been down to Mallows Bay a couple times to talk to some high school students about the importance of the Potomac and the water, and teaching them the canoe dance, and they absolutely freak out and they love it. And they want to do the dance all day. Because that's the connection, movement, water, movement, that constant flow. And I'm not sure if that's the complete answer, having access. But, you know, I think about our first treaties here and how forever we should have access to the land, hunting and fishing. Not me. I gotta pay. And I just simply, can I just come and fish without having to pay for something that is free to all of us? Can we at least keep that part of our treaties? And in reference to healing, like Gabi said, you know, we wearing red today. It's still real today. There's still murdered and missing women this very moment, today. And it's not important to most Americans. And it's not broadcast all over the world. It's not talked about in our newspapers. And I guess for me, it's not about that we can't, but where do we start? And right, and what does that look like? Does that look like the same thing to each and every one of us? It's impossible, because in my own story, I consider myself, I come from a typical Native family. I was raised in an abusive home with drinkers and drug addicts. And what I mean by that is that's that stereotype, with no access to college, etc. And you have to work hard to get past those things. And that's real. I didn't grow up on a reservation, technically. I just grew up on one street with my whole entire family on it. Still a reservation, but I could leave, right? That's good. But still having that negative influence in my life and having to work through that trauma. Now I'm only 40 years old, so I'm talking about that layer of trauma. And like we say, the millions of layers that we have to go through. And the forgiveness that I have to forgive to my parents, to my great-grandparents. So I like to be optimistic and positive, but then I think of, again, my life right this moment. And how hard it is, even still today. In particular, as a Native and Two-Spirit woman, I can't walk anywhere and get that favoritism of a straight white woman. Just can't. And when I say Two-Spirit, what is that? Gay? No. Lesbian? No. I don't want boxes. How about that? We know you have to put something. Put your race and put your gender. So we go past race and then we flow into gender. Oh gosh. Ooh. Then we're really going out to space. And we can never accept those things. So for me, I feel like it's like going home. If I go to a place, a land, a special place, it's like going home, a place of safety. What does home mean to you? A place where no one judges you, hopefully. A place where you know that who you are, what you talk about, how you feel, those people feel the same way. They think the same way, and you feel comfort. And I think that, especially for members of my family, we haven't felt that here in a long time. Long time. And I think that's a lot of work. And I don't think maybe a couple conversations and good vibes are going to get us there. I think it's going to take a lot of hard work. Blood, sweat, and tears. maybe some cutting throats and all that jazz. I don't know. You know, it happens.
There was, I just wanted to jump on something that she said real quick. Where you made the point of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the fact that most people don't know. Like, somebody says MMIW, they're like, what's what? 9% of people in a room won't have, have no idea what that means. I had a buddy of mine, good, cool white boy, as I call him, that I grew up with, known him since 6th grade. And he asked me to try and explain to him what it's like to be a person of color, like to a white, like he wanted to kind of understand my perspective. And it was a well-intentioned question. But what I try to tell people who are white when they're trying to understand what our perspectives are like is, has any white person ever considered what it's like to be white? Like, have you considered that?
A white woman?
A white woman, a white man, especially a white man. And I told him, if you try to put yourselves in the shoes of a black person and then look at somebody who's white, I told him, I think I'd last about 10 minutes as a white guy. Because being a white man in America is kind of like being in Super Mario Brothers and you eat the star and you become invincible. And the only thing that can hurt you is if you just like really fall into a hole. It's the fact that you can go through life just not giving a shit. Don't have to care about why she's wearing red. Don't have to care what these tattoos mean. Don't have to care what those tattoos mean. Don't have to know who Philando Castile is. Don't have to know what I can't breathe means. The amount of stuff that white people, especially white men, but also, cishet white women, that they're able to go through life not knowing is just stunning. Being able to only focus on your own culture, which is the normal culture, and not having to worry about what this story means, what she's wearing means, why we're here, why so many of us aren't here. You're culturally invincible. And the amount of opportunity and time and energy that must free up, I can't imagine what that's like. I'm an energetic guy. If I didn't have to worry about being black and native, I don't know what I'd be right now.
You go skiing. No, never.
Engage immediately in white people hobbies.
Jump out of planes.
A lot of healing involves people who are not people of color recognizing what it means when you can be that apathetic to other people, to people who are around you, but who you fundamentally don't have to care about. I can't become a successful person in life as a person of color who presents black without knowing what makes white people afraid, without knowing what's going to make a police officer look at me twice instead of just once. I've become incredibly good at disarming people. I could not have been, before I was a farmer, I was an executive at a software company. I could not have done that without certain skills that are not made available to a lot of people of color. I was lucky. I did not grow up in an abusive household. I grew up with two parents, both of whom were working professionals. I did not, I was the kid where my dad would take me into certain parts of what he called cut and shoot territory and Anacostia in the 80s and say, if you screw up, this is what's waiting for you because there's no safety net waiting for you. I had male role models in my life and female role models in my life at the same time. I was extraordinarily lucky. Compared to people that I grew up with, I'm the white man because I had all that stuff. And then there's a level up above that where there's actual white people and it's like, holy crap, the opportunity. I think you really hit the nail on the head. A lot of that healing starts with white people not, and it's just a dangerous thing to say, but not looking at us so much, but looking at yourselves relative to us. And just understanding the sheer volume and weight of stuff you don't have to deal with. There's kind of a corollary, I don't think it's it's related to epigenetics, but there's a growing field of study that is demonstrating that trauma is inherited. You know, a mother goes through something that winds up getting transferred to the child, whether she likes it or not. Multiply that by 600 plus years, where you had diseases racing up and down the East Coast, hitting native communities that hadn't even seen Europeans yet, sometimes literally just knocking down populations by 90%. The people that survive, what do they pass on to their children? And then the children of those children meet the colonizer and get, you know, they get the death, they get more death, more dispossession, more, like the stuff that they have to deal with. And then I'm born and I'm here and I've got all that stuff that I've got to carry with me in a country that says we're all created equal. No, we're not. There's this thing on YouTube about, you know, how do you explain what white privilege is to white kids? And they had these kids lined up in a football field, and they had the white kids start at like the 20-yard line. They had the black kids start at like freaking in the end zone somewhere, where they had the Indians like hanging on the goalpost. I don't know where we were, and they basically said, this is what racial privilege is. It's fire a gun, first one to the goal line wins, but white people get to start at the 20, and everybody else is way back here. Some of us aren't even in the stadium. That recognition, healing doesn't happen to God. And it's going to be ugly as hell for a lot of white people.
Do we have time for questions from the audience, or are we past our time?
It's about 3:45.
Okay, so maybe
We got started a little late.
okay. So yes or no?
Indian time.
Couple more minutes.
I just want to say something about this whole issue of race that has threaded through, and maybe it's my historical view, and you know, you say on your Facebook page, people will write and say, when are we going to quit talking about race? And then a lot of times it's white people that say that, which I find extremely rich, because white people invented race. I mean, it comes out of European culture, the Enlightenment, and it's, you know, and now that it's going to be problematic to talk about it, why do we have to talk about race, you know? So anyway, do we have a question from the audience? Do you have a question? You can read it from your card, or I can come get it. Can I come get it? Oh, it's a book.
Anyone else has cards they want to give me, or I can take them off?
And I think you would like us to be done at 4, or well, just so we can sort of time it to, because I know that there's the meeting happens afterwards. All right. Mary Ann Williamson has announced her bid for the presidency in 2020. She is very explicit about the need for and her intention to support reparations for a country damaged by slavery. As a white person, I am admittedly ignorant about what this would look like. Can you help me understand more about reparations? Kindly educate yourselves, I think this is for everyone, about Mary Ann Williamson 2020. Your support will get her to the DNC debate stage. But I think the question for our panel is, can you help her and us understand more about reparations?
I can start. Unless somebody else wants. Everybody leave. Reparations is one of those things where I kind of look at my fellow people in the black community and I say, be careful what you wish for when white people give you things. Reparations is such a complicated and loaded issue for so many reasons. I see it possibly setting up factionalism and colorism within black communities. I see us fighting over it. I see people who can't necessarily trace their lineage back to slavery. Like, you know, it's having gone through the Indian recognition fight and the amount of specific crap we had to prove even while the colonizer was deliberately destroying our written, you know, any written documents about us. I see with reparations, black people about to go through the exact same thing. Recognition, you know, we talk about our generation being the angry Indians. I see what the generation with us, what they intended by recognition, state recognition, federal recognition, and the end result has been our tribe is split and blown to hell.
Yeah.
And when I see reparations, I see the same thing. It's a pot of gold that is deserved, just like recognition was. But do you want it? Do you want to be the dog that caught the tiger? Who gets what? How do you decide who gets what? What do you have to prove? What documentation do you bring forward? How do white people interact with you after you got it? When now that they paid you, it's you need to shut up now about racism because it's over. You've been paid. Go away. Stop whining. Being rich or having a little bit of money, does not insulate black people from racism. Ask Serena Williams, who damn near died in childbirth because her doctors would not listen to her. Like, doctors normally don't listen to women of color when they're giving birth. Ask Henry Louis Gates when he got his Georgetown professor ass damn near arrested in his own house because somebody, a neighbor who had to have known he lived there, called the cops on him. And it's hard to say that in the context of, the money is deserved. It's deserved. It's another one of these things. Black people have to bounce in their head. It's like, yeah, we deserve the money, but it could kill you. You could choke on it. So, honestly, I don't know how I feel about it, but just, having gone through a somewhat parallel situation with recognition, there's a part of it that says, maybe we need to find another way because they hand me a check and they want to say it's over. It's not over.
Are reparations necessarily money?
That's the thing, and if they're not, and a lot of what you'll hear about from a lot of the arguments I've heard of are around money. Like when reparations enters mainstream consciousness, it's almost always about money. And I think that's what they're going to try to boil it down to. There's other ways, to deal with reparations, but just having read as much history as I have of knowing the proclivity of this side of society to want to quantify things to the extent that it does, I think there's people who have good intentions about reparations where it could go, as a combination of both monetary and non-monetary things, but I see it going to money because that's, in this country, that's where it always goes. That's the thing you can quantify. This is how much we owe you. We can't say how much land we owe. You have a hard time making policy out of soft solutions. And somebody else can probably speak with more authority about some of the non-money solutions, but my head always goes straight to the money. Because I think if reparations ever gain steam, especially if it's going to cross the aisle a little bit, out of progressive circles, it's going to be about money. All day long. But that's just all I have to say about it. Just careful what you wish for, because we've been making this scar for 600, how long? 400, 500 years? And the idea that it's going to be solved, things take longer to heal than they do to make. So I just worry a lot.
Any of our other panelists want to say something about the question?
I would just encourage people to look through, the different arguments on the cases for reparations. I don't feel that I'm qualified to answer specifically, but there are some very strong stances for reparations, and I agree in the sense of from where we sit in terms of the recognition and how does that get processed, and what that means, which is, there's always a civil war after decolonization, like the minute it's really, because all your institutions have been shattered, that's so anyway, these are huge, that's a huge conversation, but I just wanted to bring it to the idea that that might be, a further conversation to have, and there's probably people in the audience that we're engaging with that could bring much further insight to that as well.
Yeah. And just for 2 seconds, recognition was non-monetary. There's no money.
Yeah, there was no
I
check.
mean, they literally, it's just people saying, okay, you are who you've been saying who you are forever.
Yeah.
That caused us to claw each other's eyes out.
Yeah.
So when there's actually, where there's money, land, any kind of asset that, that you can generate opportunity from, there's going to be a war.
Right. And, we didn't even, I also want to make an acknowledgement on our panel, just, we are sitting here and how good it feels to be sitting, together to think this through, and having come through, so much conflict gets generated out of the trauma and the distrust and the, quite honestly, the colorism, the issues that have taken place in our community that just ripped us apart, And so, whereas we're seeing tribal structures that things are tough, but what I also see is that for those of us on the ground, there's much more of an openness to talking. I see that in younger generations. So there's a lot to do, and it's good to be here.
Absolutely.
Since I have a comment, I'm getting the eye from Angela, but I want everybody to have an opportunity to say something if you have something to add to what Cryz and Gabi was saying about the question. All right, well, I have one thing to say, and that is that in the War of 1812 and Civil War, white people were given, and I don't know if the word would be reparations, but they were paid for the loss of their labor force that either self-emancipated or was emancipated by legally emancipated. So this notion of reparations is being like, we've never done this before, and it's going to break the bank. It's actually not, or there have been, and I don't know if that reparations and what happened there are exactly the same, but there was a payment for a loss. And after hearing what you all say, I now have to go and rethink some of the things about, for example, what Marianne Williamson and some of the other presidential candidates have said. But anyway, this has been a fabulous discussion, and I'm so glad that all of you are here today. And audience, let's give a big hand.
So thank you all, and we're going to take a quick break, and if you have food, we hope you all grab a plate and then come back in. We're going to continue the conversation. Some of the panelists will be able to stay, some will not be staying, but Rob's going to facilitate a discussion. Rob, do you want to say something about what that looks like?
Sure. So, as you can see, these conversations are incredibly complex and nuanced, and essentially they take an extended period of time to even start thinking through these things. So we had a very short period today, but the hope is this is just the first start of many such conversations going forward with the programming at Accokeek. After the break, we're going to come back and talk more specifically about what we can do in regards to programming and interpretation, and help identify these particular stories and narratives. I think many of us here see cultural institutions having a social responsibility to the areas where they're situated, and having the importance of directly impacting people's lives, rather than being seen as repositories of objects as they have in the past, or for recreation alone. The idea is that we're here to really convene conversations between people about important topics. So after the break, we're going to get back together and talk more meaningfully about how we do this. But the hope is, as we said, many of you will be able to participate in this conversation, but you'll be able to share what we're talking about today with other people who aren't in the room currently. We want other stakeholders and community members and as much input as we possibly can to help think this through. It's very difficult and complex, and the more input we can get from the community, the better. So there's the opportunity in those yellow sheets that you have. If you're not able to stay, please fill those out or bring them out back and have other people in your community fill them out. We're also going to have the opportunity in the future to post information online for people to share in that way. So we welcome you to come back. Well, we have a full hour. How much time are we?
So if people can stay longer, we'll run over a little bit, but we're going to try to end at 5, close to 5.
Yeah, so like 5-10 minute break, half an hour.
Okay.
And I just want to say before we break to eat something that I'm just so grateful. And, you know, I sit from where I sit personally, but as the president of this organization, you know, my heart is broken over the things that have happened here and the things that are happening in our culture. And I just am so grateful for your honesty. And I recognize that what you all are doing is so hard. And I am so very grateful. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. And let's eat and then talk more.